we'll be looking there at verse 11 and following, that Moses flees to Midian. Now, Midian is down at the Gulf of Aqaba, and I've never been to Ezion Geber. And it's such a beautiful place. I've seen pictures, and I do know that that's where Solomon had his navy. And I know that it just had to be a lovely place. Jane and I were as close as the Dead Sea. And, of course, we had to go swimming in the Dead Sea. And it's kind of an oily-like water, and it will allow you to float easily. And so we were there, and the peoples that were there, they were such unique kind of folks. And getting to talk with them some was quite a treat. And they, of course, wanted to hear somebody that would be a Southerner like I am, and I wanted to hear what they sounded like. But it was just a fun time for us to be there and to go down as far as we could. Now, we went to Bethlehem, but we could not go any further south, nor could we go into Lebanon because of missile attacks that had happened just the day before in the time that we were there. So we were able to be in the Holy Land, but we were restricted in some ways. But just for your thought this evening, I'd like for you to think with me about the movement of God's people. Now, what we have in the Exodus is God's people that are coming out of Egypt. Now, we know how they pretty much got there, but we know that things started off in a beautiful way in the Garden of Eden. And Adam and Eve are here in Eden. Now, after the separation of people and after the confusion of the language, we began to look for God's people in various places. The next place that you normally would see God's people is going to be down in Ur of Chaldees, or down in Babylon. And so let's imagine in our minds, well, does the Pew Bible have maps in the back? Or is it just a Pew Bible? Somebody look and just see if there's a map in the back of that. Anybody see one? Anybody see one? All right. So we're really going to have to imagine then the Fertile Crescent. Now, you remember in your school days the Fertile Crescent and learning about that. And here is the Euphrates and the Tigris River, and they're flowing. In between those rivers is a place called Mesopotamia, or the meaning of it is between the rivers. And most people would say that Eden would be right there, somewhere in between the rivers. And from Eden, we go south then to Ur of Chaldees. But the Lord said to Abraham, Abraham, I want you to leave your people, and I want you to go to a place that I will eventually tell you. But he didn't tell him right off where he was going, did he? But Abraham started, and his nephew Lot came along with him, and he would leave from Ur of Chaldees and travel way to the north to a place called Haran. You remember Haran, don't you? You remember Laban. You remember Jacob going there. And you'll remember that he would meet some very special people, and God would bless him richly. And from Haran, we're going around the Fertile Crescent. We're leaving from Babylon or Chaldees, and we're moving north, way north to Haran. So let's do this. I don't know, how am I situated here? Is this east-west or is this north-south? This is east-west. All right, let's do this. So where's south? This is south, okay? So south is going to be toward Egypt, okay? All right, now y'all are Egypt. Got that? And then we're going to go way north to Haran. And y'all are Haran. Now, who are you? You are Haran. And who are you? You're Egypt. So we've gone north-south. And now then, let's imagine moving from y'all around the back over there, I want you to be okay? Now, Rudy, back there where y'all are, I'd like for you, let's see, we're moving to from the southern part, northern part, and over here would be and over here would be Haran, and from Haran down to Canaan. All right, now folks, y'all are going to be Canaan. Got that? And from Canaan, we're going further south, and we're going down into Egypt. And then from Egypt, we're coming back to Canaan. And from Canaan, we're going to go again to Babylon, or of Chaldees. And then we're coming back to Canaan. Are you clear now? You feel real good about this? Because what I want you to know now when you finish is that you're going to have the entire Old Testament right here at your fingertips. So we've got Abraham leaving going to Haran, and from there God directs him down to Canaan. And then there's the famine there in Canaan, and God allows his people to go down into Egypt because Egypt is further south and there's food down in Egypt. And then from Egypt, Moses is going to come along that we're studying about right now, and he's going to take the children of Israel up out of Egypt back to Canaan. And after that, there's going to be the captivity, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and take away the southern kingdom, and he takes them all the way around the Fertile Crescent back to Egypt. And then there's going to be King Cyrus that will give an edict for all of the Jewish people to come back to their homeland. So here we go around the Fertile Crescent back to Canaan. Now, how do you feel? Got somebody said lost over here. All right. So if we are traveling, we're going to leave from Egypt with Moses. But before we do, we're going to find out that poor Moses is going to be right here in the land of Midian. And he meets this guy by the name of Jethro, and he marries a young lady by the name of Zipporah. And they have their first son, whose name is Gershom. Now, we have a Gershom in our church, don't we? Am I pronouncing it right? That's right, don't we? Gresham. Oh, well, close enough, all right? So we've got him right here. Gresham, not Gershom, Gresham. All right. Now, y'all stay with me, and we're going to move all the way around the Fertile Crescent. Now, somebody tell me this. Looking at your map in your Bible, why couldn't we just go directly across instead of going all the way around the Fertile Crescent and following the rivers? Why couldn't we go across? Well, we know those Bedlam shepherds, they knew better than to try that, and they knew the desert. But those guys would only go so far. When we were in the Judean wilderness, there was this Bedlam shepherd group, and they stopped the bus, and everybody got off the bus, and as soon as we did, there were turbans hitting our head. They were wanting to sell us turbans, I guess. And we'd be there in the middle of the Judean wilderness. But these shepherds would not dare to try to go across there because of the desert territories. So when Abraham traveled, it was always around the Fertile Crescent. Now here at the Gulf of Aqaba and Ezon Geber, this would have been a wonderful place to be because it'd be on the backside of nowhere, and that's where Moses is going to be. He's down here in Midian. He's going to come to the Mount Horeb, as we'll see in just a moment. So, from Eden, we go down to what place where Abraham was? From Eden to Ur. And from Ur, we go north to where? Haran. And from Haran, we go down to Canaan. And from Canaan, we go down to Egypt. And from Egypt, we come back to Canaan. And from Canaan, we go into captivity around the Fertile Crescent again to Babylon. And the Persian edict brings us from Babylon back to Canaan. Now, if you'll plug in now all of the biblical characters that you know, then you will have had, in that just little trip we've made, the entire Old Testament. Does that make you feel good? Makes me feel real good. To know that I can, at fingers tips, I can say, well, I do know that at this time that Joseph was in control down in Egypt, but it didn't last too long, and God sent Moses down to bring Israel up out of Egypt again into Canaan land. And he used Moses to do that. How many of you been on this journey before? You haven't been on this journey before. Well, I'm glad I took you. Just so you'd say, I believe that the Old Testament teaches me this is the movements of God's people and how God intervened in such a magnificent way to keep his people alive, to keep them well, to bring them to the place he said that he was going to bring them to Canaan land. To Canaan's land I'm on my way, where the soul never dies, right? That's, whenever I think about the movements of God's people, then I can understand a little bit more about Moses here, because Moses was brought up in Egypt to the south. And then here he comes down into, from Egypt, he comes up into the Canaan area, and God has to train him to travel that area because he's going to have 2 to 3 million people that are going to be following him. So that's what God does. So let's go back now to chapter 2 of Exodus. Chapter 2 of Exodus, and let's read a little while as we look at what God is doing. Verse 11, it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren. He looked at their burdens. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. He said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? And then he said, who made you a prince or a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared. So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And Midian is on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba. and he is past the peninsula there. He's away from Pharaoh, and he sits down at a well. Verse 16 says, and the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs of water to water their father's flock. And then the shepherds came, drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to rule their father, he said, how is it you've come so soon today? So Moses obviously is a pretty assertive fella. He saw this Egyptian harming a Hebrew whom he loved, because his mom had taught him, you're a Hebrew, you're not an Egyptian. But the Midianites thought Moses was Egyptian. Maybe his speech, maybe the way he looked. But they were thinking maybe that he was an Egyptian. But he came and he overpowered these other shepherds and allowed these girls to water the flock. Verse 18 says, when they came to rule their father, he said, how is you've come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hands of the shepherd, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock. So he said to his daughters, and where is he? Can you see that, Dad? Where is this guy? Why have you left the man? You suppose that he knew he had 7 weddings to pay for? And he's got 7 girls and not a prospect in sight. This is Midian. And he says, you mean there's this guy who was so heroic that he watered your sheep and you just left him there? I think he was a little bit misput with the girls. Do y'all think so? And here it says in verse 20, said to his daughters, and where is he? Why you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. Now, if you watch Charleston Heston, you'll know that the girls were kind of fighting over Moses. But Moses is given Zipporah. And she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. Now, it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage. And they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of this bondage. Now, look what God did. Verse 24, so God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So he heard, he remembered, he looked, and he acknowledged his promise from long ago. God never forgets a promise. And here he is ready to bring Israel up out of Egypt back to the place where he wanted them to be. Now, the Bible scholars will say, God longed for that time when he walked in the cool of the evening with Adam and Eve, and he had them in a very special place, this Garden of Eden, and he is longing for his people to be back with him in close relationship once again. And so the Exodus, the most important event in the Old Testament, the Exodus, God brings them out of Egypt and brings them to a place where he again can fellowship with them. And he's using Moses to do this. Let's look at chapter 3. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. Can you beat that? This guy is probably one of the most schooled men in Egypt. He was in the Pharaoh's daughter's household. Pharaoh had paid all of his college bills, and now he was quite well schooled. He probably was quite the athlete. He probably could overcome several shepherds to kill an Egyptian and then to run from Pharaoh and to go by himself through wilderness territory. This is the guy we're looking at here. And God is going to use him in a miraculous way. But Moses tried to jump ahead of God. He was going to say, you want me to deliver Israel out of Egypt? Here's what I'll do. I'll just start right now. And he goes out, don't treat that Hebrew that way. He was going to win them to him with this overpowering personality, this intelligent mind. He was going to do it. But that wasn't what God wanted at all. And if we get to the point in our lives where we think that it's our intellect, it's our abilities, then we're going to find out that God cannot use us. But what we've got to find out is what God's going to do through us. So he's looking at Moses. Let's continue. This father-in-law, he's a pagan. He's from Midian. Some people say that they would have known about the one God of Israel, and that's very possible. He led the flock back to the desert, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. And then Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush, and he said, Moses, Moses. And he's looking into the bush, and he said, here am I. And then he said, do not draw near this place. In other words, he said, don't keep coming any closer. Take your shoes off. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. So this very proud man finds himself now keeping the sheep, a most common job, for 40 years. 40 years. That educated, with that kind of ability, and there he is. And God is getting ready to use Moses on one of the most miraculous things that has ever happened, to bring slaves and make them a nation and bring them into the land that God promised to give to them. But he's got to get Moses to the point where he's able to do it. Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the Lord of your father Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Moses hid his face. I think he was repentant at this moment because he was scared to death. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, and I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up into the land, to a good and large land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Jack Crystal always said that about the end zone. To the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now, therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Have you ever had something happen to you that took all of your words away? A burning bush. I can't figure it. Now, Moses had been here for how long? 40 years. From Mount Horeb, all over this peninsula, all over the land of Midian. I don't know how far you could go in 40 years. But he's beginning to know the terrain. He's beginning to know what God will want him to do with his people. And he's preparing a man who was so very well educated, but now he's getting a different kind of education. A kind of education that would make him dependent upon God. It's not who we are, but it's who God is. And Moses is quite interested. He wants to know who this is that's talking to him. But God allows him to see something, takes his breath away. When my son and my daughter were born, I was in the delivery room, and there was a doctor. The doctor that delivered our son delivered Jane. And we were there in the room together. And when I saw my son, I didn't know what to say. I just thought, Lord, I thank you for what you've given to me. I don't really understand this. And if you had asked me, Dan, how you feel? I don't know what I'd say. Don't you love it when these commentators come up to somebody who's just won some gigantic contest? Well, how does that make you feel? And then they're supposed to answer, right? What do you mean? How does it make me feel? To stand speechless in front of the burning bush. Some people say, all it was lightning. Oh, no. You're talking to a guy who'd been out there 40 years. I know it wasn't. You know why? Because the angel of the Lord spoke through the bush. And here, most scholars will tell you the angel of the Lord is this picture of Jesus in the Old Testament. That's what I believe, as Jesus began to speak to Moses. And when you're so overwhelmed with what God's doing, you don't have words. You just listen. Lord, what would you have us to do? Sometimes God changes everything about us. Sometimes he takes a Jacob and he makes him an Israel through a wrestling match all night long. Sometimes God will take a guy by the name of Saul, so schooled in the ways of Judaism, and he will make him a Paul, the greatest missionary who ever lived. God will do that, and God will do that with you when he has you in the right place. Because Moses thought he was going to do the deliverance. But God had to get him right. And when he did, they were ready to move out from Egypt. And Moses, no doubt, would have known from his families the promises of God that were made so many years ago. You remember how many? 400 years ago. And now God's bringing him to this point. And I think as he considers the chronology, as he considers the angel of the Lord, as he considers a sight that he's never seen before of a bush that burns, but it will not burn up. Some people say, well, that represented Jesus Christ. And that bush was just thorns and brambles and so forth, and it caught fire, but it wouldn't consume like the judgment fire of God that came upon Christ when he wore the crown of thorns. Maybe so. I don't know. Maybe so. But God brought Moses to this point. And now he was ready. He's going to ask the name of God. He's going to say, I'm going to go down to Egypt, and I am going to speak to who? I'm going to speak to Pharaoh. Now, this Pharaoh wouldn't remember anything of the past of Joseph. But you want me to go and to speak to Pharaoh. Who, me? And now God has another big lesson he's got to teach this guy. Who, me? That I would go? And God simply says to him, I will go with you. Let's read it real quick and we'll be finished. Let's look at it one more time in Exodus 3. Look at verse 14. God said to Moses, after he says, who is it that's sending me? He says, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. And moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. If they ask a question, who's sending me? Then God simply says, I am. Now, right here is another one of these speechless moments. Just as we might look at a burning bush, and I couldn't say, I don't understand why this is happening. It's beyond my knowledge. And that God says, I am, is beyond my knowledge. But I do know that God is saying, I am the pre-existent one. I'm the one who always exists. I have no change. There's nothing about me that would ever change. I am in control. I am. And Moses is saying, God, you expect me to go down? I can't do that. And God says, I am. He says, I don't have the strength to do this. And God says, I am. He says to Moses over and over again, I am the one to meet all of your needs. Now, next week, I want to take the name I am that I am, or I am who I say I am, and I want to see how it develops from Yahweh or Jehovah or Adonai. One of the rabbis in Greenville, he came to me and he grabbed me by the shoulder here and he said, Adonai, Adonai. And I said, what do you want? And all he was doing was saying, sir, would you listen to me a minute, sir? And you take the Adonai, which has vowels, you put that with YHWH. A lot of people say, I am, YHWH. And they add the vowels and it becomes something like Yahweh. And then if you add Adonai in there, then it becomes Jehovah. But it was the name of God that is letting Moses know it's not, Moses, your strength or your power. I am. I am the one that is going to assist you along the way. My son-in-law told the story of Drew Brees, who is his favorite quarterback. I don't know if you folks are New Orleans Saints fans or not, but they were playing Tom Brady. Of course, you know, the last year, the Buccaneers were the world champs, right? Tom Brady was what? How old was he? 40, who knows? 46? 44. And he just did what seems to be the impossible. And David said that the commentators, after the game was over, of course, they beat the Kansas City Chiefs, but before they did that, they just mopped up on the Saints, you know. And he said after that game was over, that Drew Brees went to the dressing room and he changed and put his good clothes back on, got his wife and his children, and brought them out on the field. Did any of you see this? I did not. And David said that when Tom Brady saw him, that they came over and embraced one another even after the shellacking that they had given them. And that Brady took a football. And he says, Drew, you boys catch a football? And Tom Brady began to throw passes to Drew Brees, his children. And there they hugged one another, and they knew there was something very, very special, even though one had just cost another one probably more money than I'd like to think about. But there it was, just playing out there. Said that there was one of the groundskeepers that came up and saw the boys out on the field and said, "Hey, you boys, get off that field." And the little fellows came running, and they just ran up to Drew Brees and Tom Brady. And Tom Brady said, "They're with us. They're with us." Well, how do you think that groundskeeper would have felt? He'd probably just walked on off, right? But here's the situation. When God said to Moses, "Moses, I am, and I am that I am, and I am who I will be, and there's no changing in me. I am." And he says of those times with Moses, Moses said, "I can't do this." God says, "I am." He said, "I'm not strong enough to do it." I am. "I'm not worthy to do this." I am. And anything that you think about, that you think you lack, I am. Y'all have a great evening. Good to see everybody. God bless you. Enjoyed the time with you.